everyone to another Montessori Musings webinar, and it is a huge pleasure to welcome Annie Davey, colleague, also kind of kindred spirit in relishing children's outdoor experiences and real advocate for outdoor learning for children. She is going to share with us her work on resilience, but also a little bit on self-regulation. And I hope it will give you an opportunity to reflect on your practice and what we do in Montessori settings, which fosters that resilience, or perhaps inspire you to think about what more you could do in order to encourage resilience in young children's learning. I'm not going to remind you of our ground rules because I see that we have got faithful friends who come every week to listen to us, but just to remind you that we will break out into the breakout rooms when Annie finishes her presentation. And today you will have two facilitators in each room to help you to make the conversation flow. And once again, we are hoping that you will give us concrete examples from your practice. So enjoy Annie's wisdom and Annie's very considered ideas about this very important topic. Over to you, Annie. Thank you.
Thanks, Barbara. Thank you so much. It's always a delight to, I would always to go anywhere that Barbara invites me because I have so much huge respect for Barbara and her work. So I'm delighted to be here and fantastic to see so many people here. I'm trying to imagine what your days have been like, whether you spent time in nurseries with children or in front of screens, or how you've been spending your day. But I think I've just come out from outside. I thought I'd better go and get a bit of outdoors, and it was a beautiful spring evening out there, and blossom trees everywhere, and a new moon, and it feels like spring. So I just maybe take a minute to before we start. It's always useful for me, particularly because I spend a lot of time on screens now, to just kind of get a sense of your body and how you're sitting, and how you are you right now in yourself. So just see if you can sit a little bit more comfortably and relax a little bit more. Notice where your breath is in your body. And just know that hopefully we've got an hour or so together, and it's a time for you to be nurtured and to think and reflect, and any thoughts or concerns or worries or shopping lists or what you're doing for dinner or whatever it is, just whether, that will still be there, but just maybe let it just lift a little bit off your head and shoulders before we start. That's what I need to do anyway. So I'm going to share a screen. So I'm going to share with you a whole lot of slides, and I'm going to go through them pretty quickly because we've got so it's going to be a bit of a whistle stop tour of some of the things that I'm interested in at the moment, and I hope you are too. I think I saw somewhere on the screen come up Tanya Fletcher's in the room. Tanya, some of the pictures I'm going to be showing her from the nursery that she and I set up together, but she really more than me, there she is, hi Tanya, that she really more than me has been involved in. So Tanya, you'll recognize our children, or your children I should say, and I should be talking not exclusively but a bit about the work of Flo's Nature Nursery, which is a new nursery. So I wasn't sure if you were going to be here or not, but probably you should be doing this presentation next year. So right, I'm going to share the screen. Okay, so but originally Barbara and I, we talked about resilience. I've been working with this map which I've called Routes to Resilience for quite some time now, because so much has been written about resilience and people come at it from so many different angles. They come at it from psychology or from biology, or from certainly people are talking about emotional resilience. They're talking about now particularly we're talking about immunity and our resilience to illness and disease, is very topical at the moment. And I have this map, and the bottom half is very much the body. The middle half is very much the emotional, the heart, the orange area, and the purple is the head, if you like. And some time ago, actually, Tanya, we had a parents' evening at the nursery, and Tanya posed this question about what would you like your children to have learned when they're 15 years old, and everybody came up with some really good suggestions. All the parents said what they were interested in, you know, what they wanted their children to learn, or what the sort of qualities they wanted them to have gained in their childhood and in growing up. And the one thing that the words that came to me was, I really would like each child to have an inner compass, to have that inner sense of, you know, being able to know their direction and to be able to balance themselves, to recalibrate themselves, and to be able to do that from a very inner felt sense. And so I've been working very much with the link of the idea of the inner compass as a self-regulator, but also as a sort of key to resilience, and being a very holistic key to resilience. So so that's what I've decided was the theme for today. So of course, people talk about nature. I'm really going to come to it very much from the point of view of how do we work with nature. And obviously, when we often say about connecting to nature or being in nature, but actually we're so much part of nature. And from when we are very young children, from when we are preconception, we are biological, we have our biological life element, and we are a mixture of water and substance, including the same substance that stars are made of. So I really always start with the body, and we're thinking about the body. And when we think about young children, we often, I think a lot of theory and a lot of our writing is about attachment and about the importance of those early relationships from inside the womb, and then immediately from birth, and then with our very young children, how they create those strong attachments and how important it is. And that's gained a huge amount of popularity in writing. And I think also, if we look at that systemically, we very much look at the individual child within their immediate environment of the family and carers, and then the wider community, and then the wider world. But perhaps what's a bit less talked about, and what I'm going to focus on today, is about the child within the ecological systems of the world. So starting with the fact that we are biological, ecological system. Even the baby's body, the baby as a child before they are born is a whole system, is a whole ecological system. And then as they grow, they are taking in their information through their senses. And then they are connecting with the more than human world. By that I mean all the living relationships we have with plants, with animals, with trees, with other living things, and then the broader landscape in which we grow up. And I think children, we often don't think about it in that way. So we're very focused on the social systems, and much less consciously aware of the ecological systems, the connections. So we think about the unique child, but from very early on, we are seeing how that child has a great interdependence with the wider living world. If you see that the child eating the apple, I mean, each apple is unique too, but this interdependence between the child and the apple, and the enjoyment and focus of that. And so we start with the body, with the lower half of that roots to resilience. And this child who's one Tanya will recognize, fantastic pride in having become so independent that she can stand upright, that she can put on her coat, that she can do up her coat, and she can go outside. And there's so much learning. I don't need to tell you all how much learning, how much development goes into that. But so much of those early preoccupations are with, how do I manage my body? How does my body work? How do I use it? How do I manipulate it? That's where the physical development is so very, very important in relation to resilience. And then gradually, as they get older, they're stepping out, they're stepping away from their carers with support, moving, taking a step, reaching out into the world and becoming increasingly independent. And then as they get older, we get into the whole realm of taking risks. and how far can you go? That's such an important part, again, in terms of what nature teaches us. When we're outside, we have so many variables, so many differences, that children are much more able to assess the what's out there and how do they need to respond, and the pride when they can. You can see the little boy's managed to get up to that tree quite well, but now he's very, very anxious about how on earth he's going to get down again. And that took quite some time for him to think about that and process it. Whereas the little girl who's climbing up the trunk is just checking out, is this okay? Is this okay? Can I go up this bit? And sussing it out for herself. And how the adults respond to those moments of uncertainty or questioning is obviously absolutely vital in terms of children managing that regulation and reaching that zone of proximal development, as Vygotsky says, where it's just beyond their immediate competence, where they're just going that little bit further to the point where it's exciting, but not so far that they're in panic and overwhelm. And how do we reach that state of flow? So the next part after the body, I think very much, is looking at the senses and how we connect with the stuff of the earth through our sense doorways. And I talked about windows and doorways, windows and skylights at the conference, and that I still talk about within that frame quite a lot. But those doorways are those 5 sense doorways, the 5 obvious senses. And again, I think quite often, I mean, maybe in Montessori it's better, but in a lot of the places that I go and train or work with, there's such people are just so unconscious of the sensory experience that children have in any early years setting or when they're outdoors, you know. So we make things, and especially now, I worry particularly at the moment with the pandemic, you know, I hear again and again people taking away the sensory experiences that children have because they're worried. The sensory things are often the things that you can touch and smell and taste, and we're very anxious about that. So I'm really wondering how we're going to bring that back. But and I often encourage people to do a sensory audit, inside or outside, where they literally take each sense at a time and think, how does this feel for the child's sight? How is this for the child's hearing? What can they hear? What's the sound? What different surfaces can we touch? What different things can we smell? And how can you enrich the sensory environment indoors and outdoors? Of course, outdoors planting, there's nothing to beat planting. It's always planting plants, and bring more plants of all kinds in because they provide such sensory delight. You can also bring plants inside, of course, but it's the sense of smell in particular, and the sense of taste, of course, and exploration, even in winter. And where are the children looking at with their eyes? Looking up, looking out. What can they see? And again, practitioners often, if I get them to stand and do it can be a 1 minute or a 30-second sense audit in any particular part of the room or at any particular type of time of day. Just what are the children smelling? What am I smelling right now? What can I hear? What's the soundscape? Is it very loud? Is it very noisy? Is it very quiet? What can we hear? The birds? What noises can we hear? And you can very quickly do a quick sense audit and then think, well, and what kinds of sounds would we like to hear? And what kind of smells would we like to be smelling? And obviously the smell is again a lovely one indoors, because if you have the privilege and able to do baking, or you're able to use essential oils as another way to bring in essential oil diffusers of different smells, and it can change the whole atmosphere. And listening is such a great one. What can you hear? Recently, with a friend, I went out again and did the listening to trees with stethoscopes. Have you done? I don't know if any of you have done that, but if you can get hold of a stethoscope at this time of year and you can listen to the trunks of the trees, and you will hear the sounds of the sort of the sap beginning to rise and the water going on, and the children absolutely will love it if you can get quite a sensitive stethoscope, and any time between now and about May is particularly good time to do that. I guess if you're in Canada or in some other country, you're going to get very different sounds. I imagine I really want to go and listen to some maple trees sometime when at the time before they can be tapped, because I think they must be making wonderful noises. And then the more than human world. How do children get to know and understand their interdependence with life around them? And again, Tanya, this is from her nursery with the ducklings. They had such joy for a whole season of watching them hatch and then living around the nursery until they are actually far too big and became rather smelly at the end. So nature again and again teaches us so many important things about ourselves and about our how we need to self-regulate in order to care for and be cared for. A little bit of pond dipping going on there. And then landscape. So the affordance, the sort of the bigger sphere, and in the little diagram I showed you at the beginning, is really about how we use landscape and affordance and nature. And I could do a whole talk just on affordance and nature and landscape, but it really affects us. I think you said, Barbara, that somebody here is from South Africa, or maybe they're people from very other countries, and the kind of landscape that we're born in and we walk in and we live in, it very much shapes the children and how they see the world. Of course it does. It's obvious when you say it, but actually, how do we create the landscape within our settings, and how do we take note of the landscape and bring the landscape into as part of our teaching? Nature has these invitations, and if we really give children time to become really immersed and to really kind of at their own pace, they will explore and gain so much from their sense of connection is so strong. I think it's much stronger for most children than it is for adults, and we spend a lot of time going out and finding experiences to recreate that sense of very deep immersion and connection and understanding that we are actually part of nature. I'm going to skip on from values. We talked about values, but I often think we should be talking about beyond British values. Some of you will, if you work with the British EYFS, will know that we talk about British values, but I've looked at a way of subverting them so that they actually become much more, so that they become international, but again global and really values for the earth. But I'm not going to spend time on that now. But that's almost the skylight side, the starting point. But what I want to talk now is again a little bit of some practical pedagogy, some practical ways in which that sort of theoretical framework can be brought to life. So first of all, creating special places. Wendy Titman years ago wrote a book called Special People, Special Places, about how children read their environment and so if you put them in on a tarmac in a tarmac playground with a chicken wire fence, that will be giving them messages about themselves and who they are. So the kind of landscapes, the kind of places we provide them, tell them, teach them, they read them, and it tells them what the world thinks of them, what sense of place they have in the world. So creating special places. This one's a planting one, but however you create it, create special places. We can do that with our early years settings. Then on a very different, thinking about structure and time and rhythm. I really, again, I think we talk a lot about routines. I would much rather talk about rhythms, because routines can imply too much structure sometimes. They can become too rigid. But children do need they need containers, they need support, they need regularity, they need consistency, but they also need spontaneousness and fluidity. So I think how we kind of work with individual children's rhythms, and nature teaches us a lot about that. It teaches us about rhythms through seasons, through the weather, through the patterns. And we also, nature teaches that can give us, we often think that going outside is about the sympathetic nervous system, about, being active, about being, being wild, about letting off steam. But actually, outside is also such if we have nature around us, it's a great place to rest and digest and to breathe and to heal. It's the parasympathetic nervous system. And this little girl here is doing a sit spot practice. I don't know if any of you have come across sit spots where children choose their special place. They don't have to sit still, but they often want to. They often find this place where they just can sit and they know they don't have to do anything. This is a place, which we should all have sit spots. This place where we just sit and do nothing. In fact, I would really encourage you all to go out and find a sit spot if you don't have one already, and just a place to sit and rest and digest and breathe and heal. I've written about this in the book a bit, but this practices the 4 Gs, which are these practices of deeper connection. And I think particularly gratitude. Again, I could do a whole talk just on these, but that nature teaches us so much about gratitude. It gives us so much guidance. It teaches about grit. Barbara, you mentioned grit in your blog, and I think, there's this, the difficult things in life sometimes, the difficult things that we face. Often nature is a fantastic way of teaching us. We come across a dead animal or a dead insect or a bird, or we learn about the things about sort of loss and grief, but in a very natural, the natural surroundings that's not overcomplicated by human stories around it. So I think that too. And then the glory, the awe and wonder that nature offers us too, of a sunset or a rainbow. So those are, I love the 4 Gs. And then flexibility. This is, as I said before, so not only do we think about rhythm and structure, but also about how we spontaneously adapt to the seasons, to the weather, to life cycles, and use that resourcing, use that. If it snows outside, if there's a frost, they went out for a walk here in the nursery and they found the frost, and they found and it led to a beautiful little creative game. So making space for the things that matter. Sort of those times where children, just these 2 on the left, they are very active and very chatty. And this is the first time they'd sat by a real fire. And they both just went absolutely quiet and just sat very, very still, gazing at the flame. So those elemental experiences can have a very deep and profound effect, whether it's seeing your reflection in a puddle or looking at flames in the fire. There's such a resource outside in the wider world. Apprenticeship and stewardship, 2 things that are talked about a lot. Again, a great way for children to practice self-regulation and also build their resilience, because it gives them a sense of connection and purpose and meaning. Very much involved in all the practical tasks of doing and loving it. Gardening is fantastic. Gardening, sweeping up the water, sweeping up the sand. And then I just wanted to mention anchored companionship. Rosie Roberts has written quite a lot about this. And for me, it's more than just the practitioner and the child, but it's anchored companionship between the practitioner, the child, and nature and the living world. And if we see this as a sort of triangle, a dance of relationships between those things. So here we have the dance of the child and the carer and the autumn leaves and the wind. And that anchored companionship is just, you don't know who's starting. Where does it stop? Where does the circle of interaction start and finish? Does it start with the leaves and the wind, or does it start with the child or with the adult? And here again, I don't know what game they're playing there, but you just see the joy, the shared joy of the wellies and the earth and the wood and the practitioner and the child, and just absolutely that kind of trust and companionship and joy. And that's a slightly bigger group where the companionship is a group companionship, as they're learning about different leaves and plants and making things with clay. So that's really, I just finally wanted to end with this picture, just because we've been in lockdown. And I just feel no matter what the lockdown, the external restraints, children's inner resilience and inner compass is constantly alive and constantly recalibrating and constantly reevaluating. And of course, I'm sure we're all wondering about what impact has this last year and the pandemic had on children's freedoms, their experiences, even their view of the human face, which is probably so much more now that. So their experience would have been very different from the children that came just before or the children that come after, I guess. But you just look at no lock is going to stop the enthusiasm and the curiosity and the inner sort of sparkle of this child. And I just felt I wanted to, I'd love to know how you're all getting on really in this time, and how your practice has changed, and how whether there's these questions about resilience and self-regulation, what does in these times, what does it mean to you? And there's been a lot of research about outdoors being much better for the spread of infection, etc. And I think a lot more people are getting outdoors. I'm thinking if it has done nothing else, it's really reconnected many people with the joy of sort of experiencing themselves as outdoor ecological beings. So I'm going to leave it there, Barbara, and I don't know who I'm handing back over to in terms of the questions for breakout groups, but I hope that's given you, as I say, it's a whistle. Almost any of those slides, I probably could have done an hour just on that. So, but I thought I'd give you a whistle-stop tour rather than go on about one particular thing. Thanks very much for listening to me.
Thank you so much, Annie, for your thought-provoking introduction. And I hope that I just loved the tone. I loved the positive connection with nature, the hopeful thought of the child's inner compass. I'm sure it has resonated a great deal with many of you. You have found some indirect references to Montessori's ideas about the inner guide. And it is so wonderful to be able to be taken beyond the Montessori writing to something that is so very current and relevant today. So please, in your breakout sessions, do think about all the components that will contribute towards the child's capacity for resilience. What experiences does the child really need to feel connected, not only to the family or the nursery, but also to the community, and of course, to be part of nature. Because I'm sorry, I have to share a personal anecdote. When I'm really happy, usually when I go for a walk with my children, there's a moment when I skip, open my arms and say, thank you, God, for this beautiful day. I am totally non-believing in God, but there is an inner power of the nature. There's an inner feeling that this is very important to me, and I want to share it with my children. So it's a family joke really about this thanking God for the moment, but it is very important. I hope you have moments like that too. Beautiful philosophy, enormous respect for nature. Montessori's writing about nature is beautifully fleshed out by Annie with lots of ideas, but enough of me for now. Please into breakout rooms and share some of the experiences or impressions that you have got from Annie's talk tonight. Thank you very much, Annie. thank you everybody for coming back. I wonder if Suzanne and Antonella would like to feedback from their session.
Thanks. I can't see Antonella
No, can
on my
I?
screen.
Oh, no,
So
I can. Oh,
I'll start, and then Antonella, will you, if you're there, I can't see you, but will you jump in if I've missed something?
Yes, of course.
Excellent. So we had a very interesting discussion in our group. Just a couple of the things that sort of stood out for me was talking about rhythms instead of routines, and sort of the realizations that routines, whilst they can be very stabilizing for children, can also be very inflexible because you get used to being in a certain routine, whereas a rhythm encourages you to sort of open your eyes a little bit more to possible learning opportunities and to go more with the children's flow, which was nice. And then looking at the concept of special places, we had one participant in our group who deals with vulnerable children, and she felt that that was really something that she would take back in terms of creating those special places where children can just go and be at one with nature. And then the other thing was just that as adults to just try and be a little bit more conscious and to look at what the children are seeing from their point of view and their perspective in terms of the senses and doorways, because we sometimes tend to look at the environment more from an adult's perspective rather than the child's. Antonella, do you want to add?
Well, on this point, it was noticed that to do sense audits is a good practice. Somehow we do it, but is not enough conscious and purposeful, and to really concentrate on all the senses. It can be brief, like Annie was saying, could be 30 seconds, but really become more aware of all the senses that children then are using in that particular place. And I just wanted to share this because I loved it so much, the example that Joanna shared of a coat left on the floor, and the teachers, the adults were asking who might be this coat. And this little boy came along and took the coat and sniffed it and smelled it, and they said, "Oh, this is," and then they said the name of the child. And I think that is a fantastic example of how children use their senses in a different way.
Sorry, and then if I can, I've remembered one more thing. Vanina also shared, because she works with elementary children in Germany. And she was saying that there is so much at the moment, there is so much restriction on the elementary child who is normally trying to find his or her place and in belonging in terms of a group, and that those children are really missing their sense of connection. And the only time that they now have to be able to explore that is when they do go outside. So that outside nature time is becoming far more important right now in terms of the pandemic, because that's where they have the space to make those connections and to understand each other.
lovely, thank you. Michelle and Wendy?
On mute. We had really lovely chat. Wendy, just interrupt me if I'm guessing too much, really. One thing, we talked quite a lot about just life slowing down more now, and the positive things that COVID has brought to our settings and what we're doing. We talked about transitioning the children and about how that anchored companionship can support that. And then Tanya, we were so lucky because we had Tanya in our room, so we were just drawing lots of information from Tanya about their lovely practice, was the sense game. So 5 things I can see, 4 things I can hear, 3 things I can touch, 2 things I can smell, and 1 thing I can taste. And we talked about how that would empower the children to to do those sort of games and manage those games on their own. Wendy, what have I forgotten? Because we talked all the time, but I didn't write very much.
No, I think, and we all agreed about the importance of planting, I think.
Oh, that was the other thing. Lots, yeah.
But apart from that, I don't think you've missed. Oh, and we all like the idea of a special seat or a special place, which I think we might go away now and try and put in the odd special place.
Sorry, can I just jump in there? And we talked briefly about risk-benefit assessments too.
Oh,
and
yes.
I left you a story about the stinging nettle.
Yes, Michelle, share it.
Just that why we write risk benefit statements rather than risk assessments is to look, because for every risk there's a positive rather than a negative. And it came about because of an Ofsted inspection where they were going to downgrade us because we had lots of stinging nettles in the environment. And I didn't try and argue with the Ofsted inspector. I just said to her, at some point for the rest of the day, ask a child to tell you the stinging nettle story, or a story about the stinging nettles. And at the end, in the feedback, she never even brought it up. So I bravely went, oh, are you going to mention anything about stinging nettles? And she's like, no need to do that, because I spoke to a child and he asked him to tell me about stinging nettles, and he took me over to the stinging nettle and he showed me how they can sting, but then he showed me how to pick a leaf so it doesn't sting you, fold the leaf so it doesn't sting you, and then eat the leaf so it doesn't sting you. And then once he'd finished that, he then apologized to the inspector because he said, I forgot that I'm supposed to wash the leaf before I actually eat it. But and so that's where we suddenly went, actually there's a benefit to every risk. So we do risk benefit statements now rather than risk assessments. But there's people on here that have heard that, I think, before. So sorry.
Thanks for sharing. And Sarah and Marion?
I'm going to let Marion take.
Sarah's very kindly delegated this to me. You can jump in if you need to, Sarah. Everybody has said a lot of what we discussed. I think we started with the statement making space for the things that matter, and how important that statement was. And just really thinking about maybe going in tomorrow and doing that, making space for the things that matter. We talked about getting down on our hands and knees and, really trying to engage with the environment the way the children will, from their height, going around touching things, and really making sure that the sense audit is done in a really child-led way, getting the children to come round and do it for us, as it were. We talked a lot about rhythm, and we talked about the importance of those two words, the contrast between the routines that are imposed more upon the life in the setting, whereas the rhythm is much more self-regulated, and thinking about the distinction of that. One of our group, I think it was, I've forgotten your name, I think it was Charlotte, mentioned how important that rhythm is for a child with special needs. She talked about a little boy who they've got who has autism, who they followed his rhythm, and gradually he's come in to the setting and out to the garden and was loving playing with the pondweed, to the extent of possibly eating it as well. But just actually engaging with the outside environment. We're all going to buy a stethoscope so that we can listen to trees, because that's really something we thought was fantastic. And we also talked about special places, letting the children find those special places tucked in behind a tree, giving them the opportunity to take control. So, but we had a fantastic session. I think 2 or 3 of us within the group were actually quite moved. When we first came together, we almost couldn't chat because we were trying to take on board the powerfulness of what had been said. So Annie, thank you. an amazing session. Thank you very much.
Just one thing to add to that, Karen in our group made a contribution talking about rhythms and how rhythms allow many voices to be part of the rhythm. It's not the voice of one person, it's the voice of many people. And I really liked that idea, how everybody is part of that.
Lovely. Thank you for all the sharing. The special places and the stethoscopes were also discussed in our group. We have been very blessed by having very international groups. So we had experiences of nature from Toronto, as well as reflections on the Reggio approach from Deb, who has worked at Connections in Worthing. We also talked a little bit about the sensory experiences or these special places and how they kind of stay very firmly in our memory. For me, I was connecting it with the spiritual embryonic stage of the child and how then memory then helps to root us. Annie talked about the fact that it's so wonderful for her to be on the beach. That's what gives her the sense of self, or that roots her in nature. So it has been very, very rich and reflective discussion. I don't know, Annie, but would you like to add to our conversations in general, or to say something to everybody?
Thank you. It's been really lovely to hear that, like all of those little echoes and gems and pieces of the descriptions. I love all the little stories I've heard about individual children and their attentiveness. One I didn't talk. There's quite a few things I obviously didn't cover in the 20-minute whistle stop, but it reminded me this sort of idea of attentiveness and attunement. And how when we shift our environment, our attention changes. And I think it's not just important for children, but also obviously for practitioners and for adults to know how a different environment affects them, and to notice if something doesn't feel right, or if they're feeling agitated or they're feeling stressed or whatever, how they can learn to take themselves off the field in some way or another, even if you can't walk out of the classroom, but to notice what the environment is and how you can change that in yourself. Sometimes for some people it's breath, or focusing your attention on your listening. Doing a sense audit can completely shift your perspective very briefly. You can suddenly stop and go, why am I feeling, what's going on? And you can shift your attention to the soundscape, or which part of your body is feeling uncomfortable. So I just think this whole resilience, the Roots to Resilience framework that I presented very, very briefly, has a lot in it for adults too, but also for whole teams. You can look at a whole organization as an ecology as well. And so you can pay attention to the ecology of the team. It's probably much too big a subject for me to open up right now, but listening to each one of you and your the stories I've heard show such kind of profound and deep and reflective understanding of young children makes me feel very, very hopeful for the world, and excited and enthusiastic. Tanya and her team always fill me with great when I go and see the work that they're doing. It's so lovely for me to have that on my doorstep and to be working close by it and involved with it to some degree, even though I'm not full-time in that sector anymore, in that field anymore. I'm much more working with adults and on screen. So thank you all very much anyway for your attention, and it was a great honor to be here tonight with you.
Thank you so much, Annie. Thank you, everybody. There's much to take from tonight, and I hope you will be able to share it with your children and your team, and they will all benefit. Next week we are back with our book club and our last 3 little chapters from Montessori Talks to Parents. So I hope you will join us then. And until then, have a good time, and I hope more sunshine and the spring days will come between now and then, so you can all be outside in nature together with the children and enjoy it. Thank you so much, Annie. Thank you.
Thanks very much.